The gunshot came before the scream. It cracked through the quiet evening air of Red Hollow, like a whip snapping over bare skin. Horses whirred in the street. A lantern shattered against the boardwalk, and Clara Bennett felt the sound hit her chest before she even understood what had happened. She had just stepped out of the telegraph office, the folded message still clutched in her hand, when she saw him fall. The sheriff. He dropped to his knees in the dirt outside the saloon, blood darkening the front of his vest. And standing 20 feet away, revolver still smoking in his hand, was a tall man in a dust-covered coat. The stranger did not run. He stood there, calm as winter stone, while the town of Red Hollow froze around him. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She did not scream. She did not move. Her mind was sharp, clear, and cold. She knew that man. Not his name, not his story. But she knew the look in his eyes. It was not the look of a murderer. It was the look of someone who had already lost too much. Wind swept down the main street, lifting dust into a slow swirl around his boots. He lowered the gun carefully, almost gently, and let it hang at his side. The sheriff coughed once, then lay still. Someone shouted. A woman began to cry. Men rushed forward but stopped short when the stranger finally spoke. He drew first, he said quietly. His voice was deep and steady, not defensive, not angry, just tired. Clara felt her heart pounding against her ribs. She had seen the sheriff's hand twitch toward his holster seconds before the shot. She had seen the flash of metal. She had seen who moved first. But no one else had been watching that closely. Yet they had all been watching the stranger. The stranger who rode into town 3 weeks ago and bought a small stretch of land by Dry Creek. The stranger who kept to himself. The stranger who never smiled. The stranger they whispered about. His name was Luke Callahan, 32 years old, broad shoulders, dark hair touched with sun streaks, a faint scar cut through his right eyebrow. His gray eyes looked like a storm that never quite broke. Clara had noticed him the first night he came into Martha Green's boarding house for supper. He sat alone at the far table, hat low, hands rough and steady. He ate slowly. He listened more than he spoke. When Martha introduced Clara as the new schoolteacher, he had nodded once. Nothing more. But she had felt it. The weight behind his silence. Now that silence wrapped around the whole town. Deputy Harris finally found his courage and stepped forward, hand shaking over his gun. "You're under arrest," he croaked. Luke looked at him, then at the sheriff's body, then back at Clara. Just for a second, their eyes locked. She did not know why her heart twisted the way it did. Maybe because she saw no fear in him, only resignation. He placed the revolver on the ground and raised his hands without a word. Red Hollow had not seen blood in 2 years, not since the railroad dispute, not since Clara's father died trying to keep peace between 2 greedy landowners who both claimed the same strip of prairie. She swallowed hard at the memory. She had stayed in town after his death because leaving would have meant surrendering everything he stood for. She taught the children in the mornings. She handled telegraph messages in the afternoons. She kept her back straight when men spoke over her. She refused every offer of marriage that felt more like ownership than love. At 25, she had learned how to survive alone. But survival was lonely. As Luke was marched toward the jailhouse, a wagon rattled into town from the West Trail. Clara's stomach dropped. 3 riders followed behind it. Blue bandanas around their necks. The Iron Ridge Gang. They did not slow when they saw the crowd. They did not look surprised at the sheriff's body. They looked pleased. Their leader, A tall man with a cruel mouth and polished boots tipped his hat toward Luke. "Well now," he called out smoothly, "looks like you beat me to it." A murmur rolled through the townsfolk. Clara felt something cold and sharp slide down her spine. Luke's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The gang leader dismounted slowly and walked toward the fallen sheriff. He nudged the body with his boot, then glanced up at Deputy Harris. "Shame," he said softly. "We had business together." The words hung heavy. Business. Clara understood in that instant. The sheriff had been dirty. Luke had not shot an innocent man. He had shot a partner. The gang leader's eyes shifted toward Clara then. They lingered too long. "You must be the teacher," he said with a thin smile. "Heard about you." Her pulse quickened, but she did not step back. "Yes," she said evenly. He looked amused. "I do hope you're teaching useful lessons." Before she could answer, Luke's voice cut through the tension. "Leave her out of this." It was the first time she had heard heat in his tone. But the gang leader smirked. "Oh, I plan to." The wind shifted again, carrying the smell of iron and dust. Red Hollow stood on the edge of something dangerous. Clara felt it deep in her bones. And as Luke was locked behind iron bars, their eyes met once more through the narrow jail window. No fear, no apology, only a silent warning. The real storm had not even begun yet. The Iron Ridge gang did not leave town that night. That was the first sign something was wrong. They tied their horses outside the saloon like they owned the place. They drank slow. They laughed loud. And every now and then, their leader glanced toward the jailhouse at the end of the street, like a man waiting for something to ripen. Clara stood at the window of the boarding house, arms folded tight across her chest. The oil lamp beside her flickered, and throwing nervous shadows on the wall. Down below, she could see Deputy Harris pacing in front of the jail, sweat shining on his forehead, even though the air had turned cool. Luke Callahan sat behind iron bars, hands resting on his knees, back straight against the wall. He looked like a man resting before a long ride, not one awaiting trial for killing the sheriff. Clara could not stop thinking about what the gang leader had said. We had business together. She turned from the window and reached for her shawl. If the sheriff had been working with Iron Ridge, then Luke had not just shot a man. He had interrupted something bigger, something profitable, and that meant Luke was not safe in that cell. She stepped out into the street. The boardwalk creaked under her boots. A few heads turned, but no one stopped her. As she walked straight to the jail, Deputy Harris jumped when he saw her. "Miss Bennett, you shouldn't be out," he muttered. "It's not safe." "Neither is that cell," she replied quietly. He looked confused. Before he could argue, she slipped past him and stepped inside. The small jailhouse smelled of dust and old wood. Luke lifted his head as she entered. Their eyes met again. Up close, she saw the bruise forming along his jaw where someone had struck him earlier. His knuckles were scraped raw. "You shouldn't be here," he said. His voice was softer now. Not a command, a concern. "I saw what happened," Clara answered. The sheriff drew first. A muscle moved in his cheek. "Doesn't matter," he said. "Harris won't stand against Iron Ridge. No one will." She stepped closer to the bars. "Why were they working with him?" Luke hesitated. Then he leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "The sheriff was helping them reroute payroll wagons. Army gold passes through Red Hollow twice a year. He'd tip them off. They'd take the shipment outside town limits. Everyone got rich." Her stomach twisted. "And you?" she asked. "I used to ride with men like that," he said plainly. "Not Iron Ridge. Another outfit. Years ago." There was no pride in his tone. "Why'd you leave?" His eyes darkened. "Because one night we robbed the wrong wagon." Silence stretched between them. Clara felt the weight of something unsaid, something heavy. And tomorrow, Luke continued, Iron Ridge plans to take the army payroll coming through at dawn. Sheriff was supposed to clear the road. Now he's dead. So they'll make an example instead. Of you, she whispered. He nodded once. They'll drag me out before sunrise, say I confessed, then they'll ride. A chill crawled up her spine. Deputy Harris won't allow that. Luke gave a humorless half-smile. Harris won't even look me in the eye. Outside, a burst of laughter echoed from the saloon. Clara's pulse began to race. If Iron Ridge controlled the town, then the payroll wagon was doomed. And so was Luke. She thought of her father, of standing in this same street years ago watching men argue over greed, of how easily good people stayed silent when fear was louder than truth. She would not stay silent again. I can send a telegraph, she said suddenly. Warn the army escort. Luke looked at her sharply. If you do that and they find out, they'll burn this town down. I know. He stared at her for a long moment. You're braver than you look, Miss Bennett. I have to be. A shadow crossed the doorway. The gang leader stepped inside slowly, boots thudding against the floor. Well now, he drawled, isn't this sweet? Clara's back stiffened. You're visiting the condemned man? She did not turn away from him. I'm speaking with a citizen of this town. He chuckled. He won't be a citizen much longer. He walked closer to the cell and studied Luke through the bars. You should have minded your business, Callahan. Luke said nothing. The gang leader's gaze shifted back to Clara. You know, he said thoughtfully, a pretty thing like you shouldn't waste sympathy on a killer. He didn't murder anyone, Clara replied steadily. The leader stepped closer until he was only a few feet from her. You think you know what happened? She met his eyes without flinching. I was watching. Something cold flickered behind his smile. That's unfortunate. The air inside the jailhouse felt tight. He turned to leave, then paused. Dawn comes early, he said lightly. Best get some rest. When he was gone, Clara exhaled slowly. They're not even hiding it, she whispered. No, Luke agreed. They don't need to. She looked at him through the bars, heart pounding harder with every passing second. Listen to me, she said. I won't let them kill you. His expression shifted. For the first time, something vulnerable moved behind his storm-gray eyes. Why? He asked quietly. She swallowed. Because I'm tired of men with guns deciding what's right. Outside, a thunder rolled low across the prairie. A storm was building fast, and Clara Bennett knew that before sunrise, she would have to choose between safety and everything she believed in. Wait, before we move on, what do you think about the story so far? Drop your thoughts in the comments, I'm really curious to know. The storm broke just after midnight. Rain slammed against the rooftops of Red Hollow, washing dust from the boardwalk and turning the street into thick mud. Thunder rolled across the prairie like distant cannon fire. Clara stood inside the telegraph office, hands hovering over the brass key. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. If she sent the message, Iron Ridge would know someone warned the army escort. They would tear the town apart, looking for the traitor. If she stayed silent, Luke would be dead before sunrise. She closed her eyes for one breath. Then she began tapping. Her fingers moved fast and steady. Army escort, Red Hollow compromised. Iron Ridge ambush at Devil's Crossing. Arrive heavy. Before dawn. The wire clicked back faintly. Message received. She stepped back from the desk, chest rising and falling. There was no turning back now. A sharp knock exploded against the door. Clara spun around. The gang leader stood in the doorway, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. Two of his men waited behind him. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked softly. Her pulse spiked. "You're not supposed to be in here." He walked inside anyway. "Funny thing," he said calmly, eyes sliding to the telegraph key. "I heard tapping." Clara held her ground. "I log weather updates at night." He smiled slowly. That's so?" He reached out and ran his fingers over the key. It was still warm. His eyes darkened. Before he could speak, a gunshot cracked outside. Then another. Shouting followed. The gang leader's expression shifted from suspicion to fury. "What did you do?" he demanded. Clara didn't answer. The front door burst open, and Deputy Harris stumbled in, face pale. "They're here," he gasped. "Army riders. Full escort." The gang leader swore violently. He grabbed Clara by the arm, pulling her forward. "You think you're clever?" he hissed. A third gunshot shattered the window. Glass rained down around them. The army had arrived early. Outside, chaos erupted. Horses screamed. Men shouted. Thunder mixed with rifle fire. Clara twisted hard and stomped on his boot heel. He loosened his grip for just a second. She ran. Rain soaked her hair instantly as she sprinted toward the jailhouse. Bullets snapped past her, kicking mud at her boots. Inside the jail, Luke was already on his feet, eyes sharp. "You sent it," he said. She grabbed the keys hanging by the wall and unlocked the cell with shaking hands. "We don't have much time." He stepped out, flexing his stiff shoulders. Gunfire echoed close now. Through the doorway, they saw Iron Ridge riders trying to break through the sudden army blockade forming at the edge of town. "They'll try to escape south," Luke said quickly. "Devil's Crossing." He picked up a fallen rifle from the floor. Clara grabbed a revolver from the sheriff's old desk. Luke glanced at her. "You know how to use that?" She met his gaze. "I learned fast." A quick, tight smile flickered across his face. And they stepped back into the storm together. Rain poured down in sheets. Lightning split the sky white. The entire street had turned into a battlefield of mud and smoke. The gang leader mounted his horse at the far end of town, shouting orders. He saw Luke free. Their eyes locked across the rain. Hatred burned bright. The gang leader drew first. Luke fired back. Both shots cracked at the same time. The gang leader's hat flew off. Luke staggered as the bullet grazed his shoulder. Clara lifted the revolver with steady hands. She did not hesitate. She squeezed the trigger. The shot struck the gang leader's arm. His weapon dropped into the mud. Army riders charged forward, surrounding the remaining outlaws. Within minutes, it was over. Iron Ridge was disarmed, bound, and dragged into the mud. The storm began to fade as quickly as it had come. Luke stood in the middle of the street, rainwater running down his face, blood mixing with it at his shoulder. Clara walked toward him slowly. "You all right?" she asked. He looked down at the shallow wound, then back at her. "I've had worse." A weak laugh escaped her before she could stop it. The army captain approached, nodding respectfully. "You're the one who warned us," he said to Clara. She nodded. He looked at Luke. "And you must be the man who cleaned house." Luke shook his head slightly. She did. The captain gave Clara a long look. "Well," he said finally, "Red Hollow owes you." As the prisoners were hauled away and dawn began to rise over the prairie, the town slowly stepped out of hiding. People gathered in the muddy street, and they looked at Luke differently now. Not as a stranger, not as a killer, but as a man who stood when others hid. Clara felt the weight of exhaustion settle into her bones. Luke stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You risked everything. So did you." Thunder rolled faintly in the distance one last time. He studied her face, rain droplets clinging to her lashes. "I was planning to leave town," he admitted quietly. "Didn't figure I belonged anywhere." Her chest tightened. "And now?" His jaw worked for a second. "Now I'm thinking maybe I was just waiting for a reason to stay." Her heart skipped. He took one slow step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, even through the cold rain. "You still a virgin?" he whispered. The teasing edge in his voice cut through the heavy morning air. Well, she blinked in surprise, then saw the faint smirk tug at his mouth. Her cheeks flushed, despite the cold. "When it comes to trusting dangerous men," she replied softly, "yes." His smirk faded into something deeper. "Not for long, Darlin." But this time there was no arrogance in it, only promise. He reached out slowly. "Clara Bennett," he said, voice rough but steady. "I don't have much. Just a patch of land by Dry Creek and a bad reputation I'm working to fix." She swallowed. "I don't need much." He held her gaze. "I'd like to stay. Build something honest, if you'll have me." The town watched in quiet expectation. Clara thought of her father, of the empty years, of standing alone against greed and fear. She thought of the way Luke had lowered his gun instead of running, and of the way he never blamed her for risking everything. She stepped forward and took his hand. "Stay," she said simply. A slow breath left his chest. He tightened his grip gently. "Then I choose you." The sun broke over the horizon, spilling gold light across the wet street of Red Hollow. The storm was gone. The danger had passed, and for the first time in a long while, Clara Bennett did not feel alone. Together they turned toward the rising light, toward Dry Creek, toward whatever future they would build with their own hands. Not because fate forced them, but because they chose it.